Hi, welcome to our presentation on staying safe in a school shooting. Today we are going to talk about educators' roles in safety during school shootings. This presentation is by Aubrie Kunkelman, Brianna Ballinger, Cassidy Dubendorfer, Zackary Chudo, Claude, and Brooke, Albanese. We have different course learning standards. The first one is identify teacher, student, and parent rights and responsibilities in school settings and show how these have developed and changed over time. The second course learning standard is to recognize knowledge, skills, dispositions, and ethical responsibilities of the professional educator. We have 3 strand learning objectives. The first one is students will be able to determine how to proceed in situations that involve school shootings. The second one is students will be able to formulate a plan to protect themselves and others during a school shooting situation. And the third one is students will be able to identify and understand the healing process after a crisis event. These are all things we will cover throughout our slides. And we will also be giving scenarios where you should take a minute and pause the slide and really think about if you were the educator in this situation, what you could do to help your students know what they should be doing and what you would do at that exact moment. Our essential question is, how does a teacher proceed during a school shooting, and what steps should be taken to help the children's mental health afterwards? This is a question you should be thinking about throughout all these slides to try to get the best answer for.
ALICE is the #1 active shooter training solution and preparedness education program for all organizations, and it is broken down into 5 parts. A stands for alert, L stands for lockdown, I stands for inform, C stands for counter, and E stands for evacuate. In the past 4 years, there have been 2,618 school and gun-related incidents in the United States. Out of that, there were 151 deaths and 353 injuries. There are 3 different ways to respond to an active shooter situation. These 3 options are either to run, hide, or to fight. We will go more into detail about these in our 10th slide. What should you do during an active shooting? We will discuss these over the next few slides.
We have created a few scenarios to get you engaged and connecting with what you would actually do during an active shooting. So for the first scenario, we have during an active shooting, you're on the 2nd floor of your building and you hear a shooter trying to open the doors in your hallway. You suspect that your classroom may be next. What would you do to ensure the safety of your students? So just take a moment to think about ways you might react within this situation. Below, we came up with a few things that you could do for scenario 1. The first one would be to just make sure that your students know the importance of staying quiet. Second, make sure no one is visible through any windows. This includes the windows that are indoors. Make sure to block the door with something heavy in case the shooter can open the door. This is especially important in this scenario because you're on the 2nd floor and there's not really anywhere else you can escape to, so you have to just hunker down in your classroom. And lastly, we get students ready with some items they could throw at the shooter if they happen to get in the classroom. It's important to just make sure that your students are prepared for any of the situations. The next couple of slides, we'll be going over more generalized ideas on how to handle an active shooter, not so specific to scenario 1. In this slide in particular, we'll be talking about if you have the option to run and escape. So we have that getting away from the shooter or shooters is top priority. And then when you are escaping, it is important to leave behind all personal items and just get away. Help others escape if possible, but evacuate regardless of whether others agree to follow. This might be more aimed towards your coworkers, not so much your students in this situation. Warn and prevent individuals from entering an area where the active shooter may be. And call 911 when you are safe. Describe the shooter, location, and weapons that are being used. Sometimes escaping is not a viable option for people in the situation of an active shooter, so that your next reasonable response would be to hide. So get out of the shooter's view and stay quiet. Silence all electronic devices and make sure they won't vibrate. Lock up doors, close blinds, and turn off lights. Make it seem as though no one is in the area that you're in. Don't hide in groups. Spread out along the walls or hide separately to make it more difficult for the shooter. Try to communicate with police silently. Use text messages or social media to tag your location or put a sign in the window. Stay in place until law enforcement gives you an all clear. And your hiding place should be out of the shooter's view and provide protection as shots are fired in your direction.
Fight as an absolute last resort. Commit to your actions and act as aggressively as possible against the shooter. Recruit others to ambush the shooter with makeshift weapons, like chairs, fire extinguishers, scissors, books, etc. Be prepared to cause severe or lethal injury to the shooter when doing this, and make sure to throw items and improvised weapons to distract and disarm the shooter. So now we'll be giving you a second scenario, and we want you to think about what you would do or what you should do during this scenario. So while you're teaching, you hear your principal come over the speaker with your school's code word for an active shooter. You do not want your students to panic, but you need to make sure to secure your classroom. What steps should you take to keep you and your students safe? Just take a couple minutes to think about it, and we'll talk about it on the next slide. So some of the things that you could do for the second scenario is, first you could do is tell them everything that's going to be okay, but they need to be staying very, very quiet in order to stay safe. Also, you should tell them you are all going to work together to stay safe. Try moving desks and cabinets in front of the door together and make it almost like a team building workshop, but obviously it is very serious. Also, tell everyone to grab a large book to protect themselves or to throw if needed. Have everyone finding a hiding spot and try to stay as calm as possible, with also staying as quiet as possible. For the next portion of our presentation, we'll be going over what to do after a school shooting. We'll be going over scenarios for you, along with going back to school after a school shooting and how you will mentally feel and how you should help your students feel and cope with the situation.
Scenario number 1. Once you return back to school after a school shooting, you notice that when you clap to get your students' attention, some of them now jump when you clap. You notice this, but you don't know what you would do. What would you do to try and get them to stop? What are some things you can do for the students in scenario number 1? First off, you can change the way that you get your students' attention. Instead of clapping, you can snap, you can whistle, you can play music. You could do a lot of different things to get them to stop talking and to listen to you. Second off, you could address the students who jumped, or just talk to the class as a whole. You can let them know that they're not alone and that there are plenty of resources that they can use. Here's a list of some things you can do immediately after a school shooting. The first thing being keeping your hands visible and empty. You wouldn't want a law enforcement officer to mistake you for the school shooter, and this is a good way to prevent that. You should know that law enforcement's first task is to end the incident, and they may have to pass injured along the way. Officers may be armed with rifles, shotguns, handguns, pepper spray, or even tear gas to try and control the situation. Officers might shout commands and may push individuals to the ground for their safety. You should always follow law enforcement instructions and evacuate in the direction they come from, unless otherwise instructed. You should always take care of yourself first, and then you might be able to help wounded before first responders arrive. If they are injured in immediate danger, you should try and help them get to safety. While you are waiting for first responders to arrive, you should try and provide first aid. Apply direct pressure to wounded areas and use tourniquets if you have been trained to do so. You shouldn't try to if you aren't trained. You should turn wounded people to their sides if they are unconscious and try and keep them warm. Consider seeking professional help for you and your family to cope with the long-term effects of this trauma. Here are some things you can do while going back to school after a school shooting. The first thing would be to reassure children that everything is going to be okay. You should allow them to ask whatever questions they might have. It's also a good idea to look at their emotions and how they're acting to make sure that their mental health is in a good state. You should also go back over school safety measures and steps to take so that they feel safe. You should also give them resources for more help. You should have the school counselor come into the classroom and talk about the incident and what they might be able to do to help with if they have any issues. You should let them know you're always going to be there to talk to them and make them feel safe.
With all the information given about what to do after a school shooting, here's another scenario to think about. After a school shooting, you notice one of your students stops showing up for class every day. They are the type of student that shows up for school every day and on time. When they do come to school, you notice they are quiet and to themselves. What would you do? Take a moment to think about what you would do in this situation. There are many different ways to handle a situation like this, and it's really up to you and what you think is best. But some things that we would suggest is to reach out to the student to make sure everything's okay. And if you can't get a hold of the student, reach out to parents or guardians of the student and provide the student with resources they could use if they are in need of help. So now we're going to show you a recap video which reinforces everything that we have went over so far in our lesson. So it'll just talk about what to do in a dangerous situation where there might be an active shooter.
It may feel like just another day at the office. But occasionally, life feels more like an action movie than reality. The authorities are working hard to protect you and to protect our public spaces. But sometimes bad people do bad things. Their motivations are different. The warning signs may vary, but the devastating effects are the same. And unfortunately, you need to be prepared for the worst. If you were ever to find yourself in the middle of an active shooter event, your survival may depend on whether or not you have a plan. The plan doesn't have to be complicated. There are 3 things you could do that make a difference. Run, hide, fight. First and foremost, if you can get out, do. Always try and escape or evacuate, even when others insist on staying. Encourage others to leave with you, but don't let them slow you down with indecision. Remember what's important, you, not your stuff. Leave your belongings behind and try to find a way to get out safely. Trying to get yourself out of harm's way needs to be your number one priority. Once you are out of the line of fire, try to prevent others from walking into the danger zone and call 911. If you can't get out safely, you need to find a place to hide. Act quickly and quietly. Try to secure your hiding place the best you can. Turn out lights, and if possible, remember to lock doors. Silence your ringer and vibration mode on your cell phone. And if you can't find a safe room or closet, try to conceal yourself behind large objects that may protect you. Do your best to remain quiet and calm. As a last resort, if your life is at risk, whether you are alone or working together as a group, fight. Act with aggression. Improvise weapons. Disarm him. And commit to taking the shooter down, no matter what. Try to be aware of your environment. Always have an exit plan. Know that in an incident like this, victims are generally chosen randomly. The event is unpredictable and may evolve quickly. The first responders on the scene are not there to evacuate or tend to the injured. They are well trained and are there to stop the shooter. Your actions can make a difference for your safety and survival. Be aware and be prepared. And if you find yourself facing an active shooter, there are 3 key things you need to remember to survive. Run, hide, fight.
So here are a few resources that are available. There's a Youth Engaged for Change, National Traumatic Stress Network, the Safe School Helpline, and Youthline. And these are all resources that will provide information on keeping schools safe.